do believe that if you're able to leverage and unblock some of the stuck infrastructure projects in the country, it can give great benefit to the country as a whole.
Okay, now before I ask you more about the report, could you tell me why, as a professor at an international management school, did you choose to study India's Pragati initiative?
Well, I've always been very interested in looking at the links between technology and digital governance with the development of a country or a society. And certainly, as you look at examples around the world, India has a couple of very good examples, including, for example, the Pragati system. So for me, studying Pragati was a privilege because really it allows me and my team to go more into depth into looking what I think is a best practice example of how digital governance, when combined with effective leadership from the top, leads to good results for a country.
Now, how did you go about assessing Pragati? It is an unprecedented initiative, so you must have had to come up with an equally unique methodology to evaluate it as well.
Well, research is never easy, so you have to make some judgments and choices when you do any research, especially in a complex topic like Pragati. So there were a number of projects that actually had been reviewed under the Pragati system. In fact, around the time we started the research, around 340 of them. And so we had to choose a subset of them because obviously we could not study all of them in equal depth. So we chose 8 of them, and we made the choice a little deliberately to try and cover both different sectors. For example, some projects were about building roads and bridges, others were about building train lines, others were about building power station projects, and still yet others were about building social programs and projects. So we tried to take a mix across different thematic focus for the projects. We also tried to take a mix across the country, the different states, and then we studied them through an inductive approach. Essentially, that means we tried to conduct semi-structured interviews with key leaders involved in the projects, tried to look at the data available and given to the government about those projects, and tried to make analysis of inferences from those 8 projects. Of course, these are examples that were chosen, and they give us some inferences, and we do believe that inductively we can in fact extend those results to the entire project set. But these are important results that nevertheless provide important guidelines about the effectiveness of the Pragati system.
Right. Now, what are the different facets of or attributes of Pragati which have made it a success? Is it India's digital governance ecosystem, or is it the driving of the initiative from the top, or is it cooperative federalism, or is it a confluence of all the efforts with a single-minded focus on results?
Well, you gave the answer in a way, so it's all of the above. So I think it's important to understand that, in effect, what is happening in the Pragati ecosystem is that you have a top leader, in this case, the Honorable Prime Minister Modi, who is in fact driving and using the power of his office to drive change, both in the implementation of projects and in the culture of cooperation inside the country. So how does it actually happen? So in terms of the actual culture of change, that happens by creating an environment in which leaders from both the central and the state governments are made to collaborate and made to, in fact, confront hard decisions. So you actually bring the human element into play in a much more explicit manner. And at the end of the day, we all are human beings. We all love to, discuss and argue with each other. But when we are faced with a real challenge and a real goal that is given to us to solve a problem, we often are able to come to a common solution. That common solution is in fact supported by data, because evidence-based decision making is very critical in environments like this. So what happens is the Pragati ecosystem includes a number of very high profile and very important technology systems, like, for example, the Gati Shakti, which is a nationwide geospatial database, helps in the project planning to make sure that you don't have any conflicts in the project that will lead to problems down the road. You have a project monitoring group that in fact consolidates the data about specific projects across ministries, across agencies into one combined database. So everyone has a common view about what is going right or wrong in a project, and people, including private sector companies, can actually enter data in the project management database about what is going right or wrong. And you also have environmental clearance in the Parvesh system that allow people to look at the environmental considerations so that you can build sustainable projects. So the combination of these combined with the incentive to collaborate at a human level, really what it does is it forces people to look beyond the local context to the bigger goal of the project. And what is the bigger goal of the projects? Of course, in most cases, it is to in fact complete a road or a bridge on time, but much more it is to in fact improve the lives of people and the livelihood of people. So improvement of people's lives is the ultimate goal, and that unites the various different individuals involved at the both state and federal levels.
Yes, and Professor, there are many projects, both in the government and even in the private sector, which look good in theory, on paper, so to speak, but come a cropper when it comes to implementation, like many of the projects which Pragati put back on track itself. Now, how do you think Pragati has been able to deliver as it was conceived?
Well, if you look at doing these kind of large projects, it is never easy. And believe me, it is never easy both in a complex country like India, but also in developed economies. So you have enormous, enormous cost overruns and time overruns in large projects in the US and Europe and elsewhere. So this is a problem that is a little bit endemic in the industry. Now, having said this, when you have such kind of time and cost overruns in developing economies like India, the costs of that are in fact many more, in fact, in terms of severity for the country. Why? Because the efficiency of the conversion of resources that we have for output, productive output decreases. And developing economy like India, we have a lower amount of resources, both in skilled human talent and in otherwise other resources available for creating productive new projects as compared to developed economies. So when you have less efficient use of resources, that actually is not very good for us. For example, if you have 1,000 crores of rupees stuck in a project that is stalled, that is in fact 1,000 crores of rupees not just being not productively used, but also in fact a delay in the actual productive impact of that project on the lives of people, livelihood of people. So efficiency of conversion of resources is very critical for economies like India to develop and prosper. And that's one reason why the Pragati system is very important. The studies show essentially that for every rupee that is spent, we get about 3x the amount of investment back from investment in projects in India and similar countries. So I think the Pragati project and the Pragati ecosystem is critical for countries like India to achieve the goals, for example, of becoming a developed nation 2047.
And you found this by studying certain key projects, about eight of them, six or eight of them, and they had to also be chosen very carefully, sort of represent India in the kind of expanse that it has and the kind of myriad projects that it has ongoing.
Well, yes, of course, the projects were studied to understand what the lessons are from the project. The figures about the economic development or impact are more general, and of course, they are different dependent in terms of the specific example that you choose. But I think what is important to consider out here is what is the cost of not doing the projects, or what is the cost of not having those projects implemented on time? And that's a cost which can be pretty severe for economies like India, which in fact need to use every single resource element, either be it human or be it material, in the most effective manner.
Right. And what sort of role has leadership played in ensuring that Pragati delivers the goods? The initiative has been driven at the highest level by Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself.
Yes, I think it's quite impressive. We have looked at similar, let's say, efforts by other countries to improve the efficiency, effectiveness of large-scale infrastructure projects. And I must tell you that we haven't actually seen similar results. In fact, today in a panel discussion on the topic at IIM Bangalore, Indermit Gill, who's the chief economist of the World Bank, he mentioned that in 2017, there was a similar study done by the World Bank looking at similar kind of examples of large-scale project management in other countries. And there's not a single example that he could note and that I have seen of other countries having this kind of a sustained commitment from the top of the country to large-scale project management. Because if you look at the Prime Minister spending his own personal time in reviewing important projects and identifying what are some of the causes for delays, what are some of the challenges that they face, and trying to help resolve them with the help of his leaders from both the central and the state government, that is a pretty phenomenal commitment. But I think if you look at studies in digital governance, what you always see is that it's a combination of two or three elements that make the entire system very productive and effective. So yes, you do need the digital tools. In our case, we have Gati Shakti and Parivesh and the project monitoring group, but we also have other important elements like the Prime Minister's himself, his own personal involvement. We have also the culture of collaboration that is there across both state and central levels, and across, in fact, a group of key leaders in the government across the country. So it's a combination of that Team India plus leadership in the top, plus the digital systems that underlie the decision making that makes a successful outcome.
And you talked about your Pragati pressure in your study as well. Just explain to us what exactly is that and how did that help this entire process?
Well, the Pragati, if you look at the whole system per se, it really is a set of monthly meetings. And what we found interesting is that just the process of getting selected or nominated to be included in Pragati Review somehow triggers a whole set of urge, a reaction from key leaders to get some of the projects moving or get some of the problems solved. So just being nominated for that process itself is seen as a trigger for action. And I think this trigger for action is very critical because what you see is that even in the meetings at Pragati, the Prime Minister himself, in fact, through his own sense of humor, through his own sense of just asking people, how come this is not solved, or how come two of you don't actually get together and resolve it, gets some action done. And this kind of change is very important because what I really believe is that if you look at any of the big problems we face today in society, be it in infrastructure, be it in education, be it in health or sanitation, they all require systemic change, system-wide changes that require the collective collaborative action of multiple players. So you, in fact, engender and support the system-wide change by creating the culture of collective action.
Right. And what do you think would have been the fate of these projects and schemes without the Pragati platform and the way that it's been led by Prime Minister Modi?
Well, the fate would have been a lot of delays, a lot of waiting, and a lot of, I think, probably hurt and harm caused to the lives and livelihood of people. I lived as a child for some years in Assam. My father was in the Air Force and we were based in Assam. And I remember the child seeing the Brahmaputra River as an important major, river, and there was such strong currents in the river. I remember crossing the river in boats. It was always both exciting as a child, but also, I must say, a little bit dangerous. And this river was considered as, unbridgeable because it was very difficult, very remote, and often changed courses. And in fact, the bridge across the river was first, at least started implementation in 2002. But in 2012, nothing much had happened actually, 10 years and no progress. In 2015, this project was in fact brought on the Pragati Review, and thanks to the efforts of many people across the state and the center, the bridge was built in 2018. So in some sense, this rail and road link that was built across the bridge in the Brahmaputra helped connect different parts of Assam together and help improve the quality of lives and the livelihood of people in many parts of the state. So I think that's the kind of impact you see. And you can contrast this with 10 years of no action versus a lot of benefits after that.
Right. And do you feel there is a scope for expanding the use of the Pragati platform in governance to areas beyond infrastructure development and social schemes? Could something similar also be of use in, say, non-governmental endeavors or, the larger objective of governance, be it tackling climate change, or for that matter, we've had an initiative at the G20 as well of alleviating global hunger and poverty?
You're absolutely right. I think, today, if you look at the world and not just only India, we all are facing major transitions, major challenges. And we have to be able to transition the economy towards a green economy. We have to be able to address major, challenges linked to the UN Sustainable Goals, development goals. And we also have to be able to leverage the technology possibilities that are emerging given the rapid change in technology. All of these elements require large-scale change, large-scale systemic change, as I mentioned earlier. And all of these can be, in fact, handled under the Pragati broad ecosystem of change. Now, clearly, there have to be some modifications made, new actors brought in, and so on, but the basic system of senior leadership, top management, or top leadership in the country involved in it, the collective governance, decision-making based on technology systems are all key elements of it. And what you find is in the Pragati ecosystem, it has already been used some of the social projects, like, for example, the Swachh Bharat project and the water and the
Yes, the Jal
provision of
Jeevan
clean
mission,
water,
as it's called.
Jal Jeevan initiative, and also, for example, electrification process of villages. So we are seeing the use of these already in the Pragati ecosystem, but I think much more can be made, especially if you look at the ambition of the country for the Viksit 2047 sort of goals, where we need the development of the country to proceed along many different dimensions, not just only roads and bridges.
And you talked about the genesis of Pragati as well, which lies in the PM's tenure as Gujarat Chief Minister. It came out of a lot of pain, but it has delivered for the people and create pain as well, not just in Gujarat, but a lot of painful issues in the entire country.
Absolutely. In fact, the origin can be traced back to the tenure of Prime Minister Modi as a Chief Minister of Gujarat, when in 2002, after the earthquake, he in fact created a simpler version of that in which his digital tools were available then, and his own direct involvement to in fact help drive the recovery of the state. So those ideas formed in fact the inspiration for the Pragati ecosystem that he put in place once he took over the leadership of the entire country at the center.
All right. And do you feel that India has provided the world? In fact, we've got a tweet coming in from Prime Minister Modi himself, where he said, and I quote, Pragati represents a wonderful amalgamation of technology and governance, ensuring silos are removed and projects are completed on time. Over the years, these sessions have led to substantive benefits which have greatly benefited people. I'm glad that the effectiveness of Pragati has been recognized in the study by, and it's the handle for the Saïd Business School, and the Gates Foundation. What do you feel about that comment that the PM's made, Professor?
Well, I'm very, very pleased to see that the tweet has been made by the Honorable Prime Minister himself and his office. But let me sort of just mention one reason why this is also important beyond India, because many countries, especially in the global south, face exactly the same challenges that India faces. They have to invest in infrastructure, they have to invest in multiple dimensions of it, not just the physical infrastructure, also the social infrastructure. They also have to be able to make these things basically use the resources effectively and efficiently. So India and the Pragati ecosystem is an important way by which other countries in the global south, and perhaps even in the global north, can learn from India. So in fact, India can show that there is a good way, and at least there's a possible good way to be able to get these large projects under control, to be able to deliver value to people, and ultimately to benefit the lives of people around the world.
Yes, and how it's driven by information technology and data is something also that perhaps other nations could sort of adapt if it's possible, because it comes as a part and parcel of the digital governance infrastructure that India has put in place, and that has been built brick by brick with the JAM Trinity as well.
Absolutely, and I think the whole JAM Trinity, the India stack, are great examples of how India has shown leadership in the area of digital governance. And I think Pragati is a very good example of how digital technologies, database, evidence-based decision making, combined with top leadership involvement, active involvement, creates the right culture for change in a country. And I think these kind of changes are extremely important for driving and preparing the country to become a developed nation in the next 20 years.
Yes, what a wonderful thought, and let's hope that Pragati is taken forward to ensure that India does indeed become a developed nation. 2047 is the ideal 100 years of India's independence, but it could be sooner as well if Pragati has anything to do with it. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Dutta, to talk about it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, there you have it. That's what a study has really said about Pragati, which is India's use of information technology and ensuring that people do not work in silos. They come together and work together to get things that were seen to be impossible and could not be challenges that could not be surmounted for decades even, get the work done. That's all we have in this edition of course, a special show that we brought for you on Pragati, India's transformative initiative. Thanks for watching, and keep watching DD India for all the latest. Prasar.